Joining me now is Clements, the UN's Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees. Really good to have you with us.
Thanks very much for having me.
So I'd like to start with the situation in Lebanon. We know that strikes have escalated again in recent days, despite a ceasefire being in place in principle. And obviously this is a country with very complex displacement crisis going on. What's your assessment of the situation on the ground as we speak?
Well, it really remains quite serious. We have seen already 1 million Lebanese, mostly from the south, that have headed north and gone to pretty much any place that they can find safety. The needs are enormous in terms of just shelter, being able to support their families, being able to find services, putting kids back into school and so on. It's also impacted Syrian refugees because, of course, Syrians have found refuge for the last 14 years in Lebanon, and Lebanon has historically been the largest host per capita of refugees in the world. And so it's impacted Lebanese and Syrians. We've seen actually some, particularly Lebanese, going into Bekaa and Syrians from Bekaa actually crossing into Syria. And this, in the last few months, we've seen something in the neighborhood of some 550,000 Lebanese and Syrians, primarily Syrians, but about 100,000 Lebanese, because they can't make ends meet inside Lebanon. So the international community is working very closely with Lebanese authorities, with social affairs in particular, to try to find community support, to be able to find housing solutions, trying to ensure that collective centers don't become centers for too long, because those tend to be schools and health clinics and other places where, frankly, those services need to continue.
I'd like to maybe pivot now to Ukraine. We know that the EU has offered temporary protection for Ukrainians fleeing war since 2022, but there is now an open debate here in Brussels about potentially tweaking those rules, particularly because of concerns that men approaching conscription age are fleeing into Europe. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts, because, this is a situation now that we have a considerably large operation inside the country and obviously have supported countries like Moldova to take care of Ukrainians in the last few years, is what's happening in Ukraine currently. The war has not abated. It's become more intense, more civilians caught in the middle. You have more territory that is basically taken over or occupied. Homes are not able to be inhabited by residents. You have more displacement inside the country. So the circumstances that created the conditions for the European Union to issue temporary protection have largely not ended. So I think, and I realize it's an active debate, but if hopefully until the war ends, there would be an opportunity to keep those temporary protections in place so that people can support themselves and so that the responsibility doesn't fall unduly on other nations in the European Union. Until then, if there's any sign of it lifting, it should be done very gradually with other options for those that need to take care of themselves when it's not possible to go back safely or voluntarily.
So you're saying that any change would need to be gradual, but in terms of the political ask is to address this concern that men approaching conscription age are fleeing. Would that be acceptable in a sense, or would that be discriminating in some way in terms of the people that can flee conflict?
Well, it's the issue is to find peace so that the war stops, that people don't have to flee, that there aren't elements where a country needs to have people drafted to be able to fight the war, first and foremost. In terms of the ability for people to seek asylum, there's always a right to seek asylum. Those conditions, obviously, are addressed on a case-by-case basis.
Meanwhile, the EU is also really adopting a much harder line, many would say, on its asylum and migration policies. We know there's a big overhaul of the EU's laws coming into force at the end of this week. It includes sort of efforts to speed up the return of migrants deemed not to have the legal right to stay in the EU. From your initial assessments, do you think this will change anything? Or do you assess that migrants seeking refuge will continue to come to Europe, knowing, of course, that the numbers have slightly decreased as well in recent years?
Well, from UNHCR's perspective, we have welcomed the pact on migration and asylum. Before, it was a piecemeal approach. All 27 members taking their own direction, which led to inefficiencies, it led to abuse, and so on. We've been working very closely with the European Union and those drafters to ensure that there are safeguards. It's something that we've worked very, very carefully. I think, it's not just about the right to seek asylum, but it's also about the return of those that don't have the right to continue to stay in territory where they've already had that claim validated or invalidated. And so to have those tools available, both to prevent abuse, but also to protect those that that need that kind of protection, is absolutely important. And this is a step in the right direction. And we look forward to working with the European Union as it's put into place and as it starts to become operational, and we continue to work on helping them fine-tune it.
One of the most controversial aspects, let's say, has been the concept of this return hubs that could be set in third countries where migrants who have failed to acquire asylum could be sent to before they are returned to their home countries. Are you concerned at all about the potential breaches of fundamental rights that this could involve?
Returns hubs in and of themselves could be used as an instrument, but it depends what is put into place in terms of those safeguards and certain conditions. What do they exist? We would obviously advocate for freedom of movement, for example, for this not to be, as you called it, a detention facility, that we would certainly not want to see families separated. There are certain things that would need to be put into place, obviously consistent with international human rights and humanitarian law. And these protections, obviously, would have to accompany that kind of an implementation.
Because you did mention that this piecemeal approach previously had led to abuses in some cases. Are you confident that there is a focus and enough political capital, let's say, being dedicated into making sure that that changes?
Well, there's been a lot of political capital to making the pact a reality. And I think there's been a lot of discussion, including with organizations like ours, and I expect that will continue.
As part of its efforts to kind of speed up the returns of migrants who don't have the legal right to stay in the EU, the Commission here is also planning on technical talks with officials from the Taliban to discuss the prospect of returning Afghan nationals who do not have the right to stay in Europe to Afghanistan. I know the UNHCR works in Afghanistan. Can you tell us about the conditions there and whether the conditions are in place to return Afghan nationals from Europe to the country?
Well, it's been a couple of years since I've been to Afghanistan, but this is a country since then that has seen millions of Afghans go home. Some voluntarily and many under adverse conditions. Inside Afghanistan, you have a crumbling economy. You have infrastructure and services in some places that are non-existent. And you have a country that has now received, in the last year, about 3.5 million people from Iran and Pakistan in particular. And some of those returns have also been under adverse conditions. So to say it's a fragile country would be an understatement. The issues with regard to what more in terms of can be received, we have to take care and help the communities be able to take care of themselves. We're doing what we can in terms of humanitarian support, but it's very minimal in terms of the international community's support there. Funding is low. We've not received, as a UN or the partner agencies, the support we need just for humanitarian needs, not to mention the larger scale rehabilitation that is required, given what's happened in Afghanistan. The other issue, very fundamentally, are rights. And women's rights, the lack of girls' education, other things that would make it possible for communities and economies to flourish do not exist. So all of these factors should be kept carefully in mind, we would say.
In this context, and given the situation you've just outlined, would you say it is appropriate for EU governments to be discussing this prospect with the the Taliban regime?
Well, I would certainly not get in the way of politics or policy on the part of those member states, but to keep in mind what's happening in the country now and to the citizens of that country.
Okay, Kelly Clements, thank you so much for joining us on Euronews.
Thank you.